Hey everyone, welcome to our session today, Modernizing Compensation Planning. Really excited to have both all of our viewers who are here joining us, as well as our awesome speakers. Looking forward to a really productive session where we can focus on techniques that hopefully you all can take back to your teams and help improve processes that are going on in your own organizations. We're going to kick things off with the agenda for today. Where first we'll be talking about what we actually mean when we talk about modernization when it comes to both HR and workforce planning processes. Some of the evolving trends that our speakers are seeing in the industry as well as in their own businesses that are pushing a need for improvement within processes. Techniques that you can use within your organization to get buy-in and really collaborate with the stakeholders that are going to be important for any process change or improvements that you try to make. And then really getting into both some data as well as some anecdotes and kind of stories that we have on actual examples of improving processes in their organizations. I'm Peter McKee. I'm the CEO at Equium. We're hosting the workshop today, and I wanted to introduce our two awesome speakers that we've got joining us. First, Andy Biladeau of SHRM, who is the Chief Transformation Officer there and spends all of his time thinking about exactly the topic that we're going over today. And then Michelle, who leads People Operations at Hopper and has gone through exactly these processes and had to think through some of these same challenges at her organization, and will be able to share some of what they went through and how they were able to be successful as well. So with that, we wanted to kick it off just first with a couple questions for Andy to talk about really maybe a bit of the theory here of the topic. And so, Andy, if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about what the term kind of modernizing means to you in the context of workplace processes and technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, thanks for the introduction. Really excited. Big fan of Equium, and so appreciate the invitation here, and more than happy to share some thoughts on this topic. As you mentioned, it's something that I'm thinking about constantly, and we're thinking about at SHRM constantly. We've got 330,000 members who are looking to us for guidance and perspective on where the puck is going. And so we spend a lot of our time thinking in the future. When you talk about modernization of HR, I think before I would get into kind of how you're seeing it functionally evolve, backing up a little bit and recognizing kind of the contributing factors for why HR is evolving and adapting the way that it is. Number one driver that we're seeing in terms of changing the role and function of HR within organizations is that every client and organization that we have conversations with at the operational level and the exco level are telling us that they're trying to radically transform themselves. And so if you think about the experience that most organizations went through during the pandemic of starting as one thing and then being something completely different, that process, which would have normally taken 3 to 5 years, was compressed. And most companies were able to respond and adapt within a year or two. And so what happened as a result of that was that executives began to believe that that was a sustainable business model, that if we want to move into new markets or we want to develop new products or services or reorganize, that's something that we can do on the fly. I think if you asked HR kind of what lift it took to make those transformations possible, what they would tell you was, I had to put my superhero cape on, I had to dive in, and I had to get my hands really dirty and do a lot of things that I had never done before. But what I think it really did was it changed HR's fundamental approach and point of view and perspective on the role that they play in enabling business operations. And the reason that I say all that is because companies and businesses have now come to the realization that they have to live in a constant state of transformation, that it's no longer a point A to point B journey they're on, but rather, how do we move into new markets? How do we move into new industries? How do we build new capabilities? And if you think about the knockdown effect of all those decisions, it really does come back to HR helping business leaders figure out, how do I go find skills in an area to build a capability that we've never had as a company before? What is my recruiting strategy going to look like? What's my upskilling and learning strategy going to look like? What's my workforce planning strategy going to look like? And so when I think about modernization of HR, I think, for years, we kind of went from a generalist model to a specialist model. You're seeing now more of a T-shaped HR professional emerge of those that have functional subject matter expertise within an area, but then those that are also able to stretch across the boundaries of those other HR domains. And so you're seeing that both at the HR functional level and down to the individual practitioner level. So when you talk about modernization, I think that that's the transformation that you're watching happen in real time.
Thanks. That makes it so much sense and resonates a lot with what we've heard from HR leaders becoming more strategic and businesses relying more and more on them, especially when you think about kind of those different categories of roles that leaders within the HR organization are playing. How would you suggest that people in those positions, maybe one or the other, are kind of thinking about prioritizing processes? Like, how should they determine which ones to go after when they think about modernization?
Yeah, I mean, you dialed into the core thing they should be thinking about, which is prioritization, right? Because in this world of rapid transformation, it can be very easy to get spread too thin too quickly. And so one thing they should absolutely be focused on is solving business problems, not HR problems. And when I say that, what I mean is historically, right, HR has really looked at things through an HR solution or service delivery lens, meaning I have a client and I'm going to bring to bear all of the capabilities that I have, whether it be learning solutions or recruiting strategies or total rewards or workforce planning approaches. I think what you're now finding is that because the wall has broken down between the business and HR, those that are doing it well are actually truly understanding the root cause of the business problem. And then they're working backwards to say what collection or suite of services or solutions need to come together to address this business problem. And so by doing that, you're de facto prioritizing the business problem above your HR solutions or building your training module or building your candidate pipeline, right, which are very tactical HR focused solutions. And instead you're prioritizing what is truly the business challenge we need to solve and what are the talent and human capital components of that. And so I think that's sort of the evolve that you're watching, and you can see HR professionals bristling at it because they've grown their career so vertically before. And so when they look at some of these business problems, their instinct is to go back to the solutions they know. I grew up in learning. If I see a business problem, the answer is we've got to train people up or upskill people. But the reality is that alone is not going to solve the entirety of the challenge. And so, yeah, that's where you're seeing HR professionals really, really stretch themselves a little bit.
Really love the focus on the business problem as what's kind of driving what you prioritize in terms of processes. Are there any kind of broader trends that you're seeing, post-pandemic, which obviously was a shock to the system, but in the last year, couple of years, in terms of what are the business problems that are emerging that HR leaders are being asked to go after and making some of this modernization effort more urgent?
Yeah. If folks have their AI bingo card at home, they can punch AI, because I will talk about AI here now, just really briefly. But I think that obviously, is a clear and present disruption that's facing HR businesses and individuals, right? And I think the way that it's impacting them, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about AI, but I think it's relevant here to your question about, as I think about workforce planning and I look at the future of what are the business needs, what are the capabilities that we want to build, you have to understand what individuals are going to do those roles while those roles are changing so quickly, right? And in radical order. So talked to the head of talent management at a global retailer a few months ago, and she shared that the entire team who was responsible for writing the product descriptions for the website and the app, they were able to replace that activity with generative AI, right? But those human beings, those individuals, from a workforce planning perspective, how do you redeploy them? How do you find those that are agile and capable of being upskilled really quickly? And then again, put them against business problems that you have in other places. I think that's really the challenge, is this dynamic workforce planning with so much disruption going on. And it's requiring, again, HR to think in quarter increments as opposed to 12 or 18 or 24-month increments. And so we've talked about agile HR for a really long time, and I think we're starting to have to walk the walk a little bit differently.
Yeah, the economic shifts or disruptions that come from AI, I think, are certainly happening on maybe even faster than 6-month cycles. So agile seems really important there. Michelle, I know we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the kind of modernization efforts that you all went through at Hopper over the last couple of years. Can you share a little bit about what were some of the business needs or just indicators for you and your team that it was time to start modernizing?
Yeah, I think like a great example, or like I just looked up the numbers because it's still shocking to me when I look back at it. In 2020, 2021, we were approximately an organization the size of, 250 some odd employees, mostly US, Canada, pretty simple. But by the time end of 2022 rolled around, we were over 900. And so within a span of 2 years, we had scaled so quickly from an like FTE standpoint. Our processes were like not fitting at that time. I wish it was something magical, but really, my boss went on paternity leave. He had a lovely time away with his partner and his child, and left me with the process for the first time. And I was shocked at what had to be done that he was simply doing to keep the things afloat, to keep the engine turning. So it was a large scale like just growth where we weren't able to like scale as quickly in process. So it was really trying to catch up in a very smart way and trying to find a way to do that. So that would be the inciting incident, I think, opening my eyes to the pain that my boss was slowly doing in the background, was really one of the turning points where I was like, we can't continue to do this, not at the scale that we're growing at and continuing to grow at.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, paternity leave or any other kind of leave of a key person definitely be a trigger, but it sounds like maybe the growth there was probably the underlying force. And I know a lot of other organizations over that time period were experiencing a lot of growth too. So it's got to be a familiar story. Maybe when we talk about kind of in both of your situations, a business problem that is kind of driving the need for HR modernization, we'll go to a little bit of data that we have to share with you all. A lot of the people teams that we talk to today are feeling pressure to improve their planning processes. And I think the reasons are pretty aligned with the category that you're both discussing of a business problem, whether it be a change in the workforce due to AI or a change in the workforce due to the fact that the company has changed so rapidly over time. And with a planning process like compensation planning, which is where we focus, or workforce planning in general, I think it becomes so clear, and I know that was true in your case as well, Michelle, that this is a problem that is impacting not only those people teams, but the business that they're enabling, which is part of what drives that urgency. So we hear consistently from not only the people teams who are under that pressure, but then also the managers who are experiencing the pains of that process that's no longer fitting the organization. So for compensation planning, where we focus, but then I think what you probably find for workforce planning processes and HR processes across the organization, these are things that are driven by the people team or the HR leaders. But again, it's a partnership with the business. And so, some of the data that we've seen recently is that even managers for comp planning, which is the process that we focus on, are finding that it is one of the more kind of impactful problems for them in their organizations, with 67% of them identifying that just that process among all of the other kind of workforce planning processes is one that is taking a considerable amount of time away from the key priorities that their organizations have, which really goes back into, I think, exactly what kind of both of you identified of. It's that business problem, not an HR problem, that is really causing the need for this transformation and adoption of kind of more modern techniques. Hopefully that enables maybe the next topic that we wanted to talk about, but we know that it is kind of a challenging topic in practice, which is really, given that it is a business problem, how can we best sort of leverage that understanding in order to collaborate with the business as a whole as HR leaders, as well as, in some cases where we may not already have it, get executive buy-in in order to undergo some of these modernization efforts. So start with Andy again. The question that I have for you is just generally when you are talking to HR leaders who are looking to modernize or transform internally and may not already have executive buy-in for those specific efforts, what are some strategies that you've seen be effective that they might be able to use in order to get that buy-in or better collaborate with their executive stakeholders?
Yeah, so this is one where I think, we've talked about just in the HR profession for a long time, upskilling the HR business partner. And what we talked about, and the background on it, the history of it is kind of interesting, right? You saw this emergence of large-scale human capital management systems kind of started taking place over the past 20 years. The idea or the promise of those systems was that they were going to remove all this transactional administrative work from HR to allow them to be more strategic, right, and be better partners to the business. And I think maybe what we took for granted or made some assumptions on was how quickly the HR was going to be able to evolve into that new elevated role. And when I say that, I mean both the strategic consulting capabilities required to operate in that role, but also the business acumen, right? So the ability to actually sit with a business leader and understand the financials and operations of what they're trying to achieve, and then be able to translate that into HR solutions. And that's kind of the second point I would make, which is this type of integrated HR model that I was talking about earlier, where it is more collaborative and cross-functional within HR to bring consolidated solutions back to the business. Because I think, Peter, some of the data that you just shared around compensation, if I'm a business leader and I lead operations, right, my instinct is I need to build this capability. I need talent. I'm going to go out and pay for it. And we've seen leaders just pull that recruiting lever and comp lever so much over the past 3 or 4 years that we've seen massive salary increases. We've seen massive wage inflation, right? There is a knockdown impact on margins and profitability. And so as HR leaders are thinking about how to get buy-in, it's being able to go and actually have that business conversation with the leader, come back, and then not try to radically transform the entirety of their HR function overnight, right? You've really got to pick that one pilot or single problem that you're going to go after and bring an agile group of HR practitioners together to solve and demonstrate value, and then take the learnings from that and take a use case-based approach and apply those learnings to the next business problem or business challenge that you solve. I think where I've seen this go sideways for some HR organizations is they've tried to do too much too quickly, right? You have to appreciate that the HR profession has been around for almost 100 years at this point. And so a lot of the institutional structures and infrastructure that it's been built upon, you can't just upend. And so as you think about getting executive buy-in, it's really about, again, commonly aligning on that business problem you're trying to solve, and then going back and bringing the requisite individuals together with the right skill sets on the HR side to demonstrate quick progress or to demonstrate the impact that they can have. And where I've seen it work really well is being able to actually provide the counterfactual to, look, business leader, you believe that this is a recruiting problem, that you can't go out and find the unicorn that you're looking for. Let me take this back and actually look at the suite of things we could do of maybe identifying adjacent skills in the organization and giving them a rotational assignment. Maybe it's creating a dedicated academy or a boot camp for a certain set of individuals to create a pipeline or bench for the role that the operations leader is trying to fill. And so I think by coming up with more creative solutions to address that business problem, it's going to shift the perception of HR while also simultaneously shifting the dynamic and operating model of HR. But you can't do all of that at once. And I think trying to do too much too quickly, you actually put yourself in a spot where it's the opposite of the intended effect, where it looks like HR is just spinning their wheels because we're trying to get our ducks in a row in the background. So start small, start focused, demonstrate value, and always put it back in the business context would be my input there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great extension to the agile piece that you've been talking about. That if you are able to demonstrate the actual impact of the business on those agile cadences, then the odds that you're going to be able to gain that buy-in just seem so much higher. Yeah, really appreciate that. Maybe Michelle, if we could kind of take it into the practical or the review of kind of what specifically happened in your organization, can you talk a little bit about how going from that point of, okay, there's this paternity leave, and I just realized we, tripled or quadrupled in size over the course of the last couple of years, and this isn't going to work anymore, to gaining buy-in from the leaders within your organization who had an important perspective on the processes you were trying to modernize with comp planning?
Yeah, I think, even drawing on Andy's, answer here, it's amazing because I didn't think about doing it like you were talking about, but we definitely started smaller. So we started with performance, which I say small, and people here who do performance management are probably chuckling. It was no small feat, but when I joined Hopper, there was no systematic performance management, nothing documented, nothing led by HR. We had a very, autonomous, lots of manager will do what's right. And as you can imagine, who is a manager loves performance management? Probably not a lot. So we started with that, and we're able to flip the script from an executive standpoint on saying, like, yes, this is important. Here's why it's important. Here's what we're going to do, and here's the data to back it. So being with a tech company, we always underscore the importance of like the data and it leading you to decisions. So when I was faced with, a paternity leave, a growing organization, and of course in HR being resource strapped at times, it was really the exploration of what can we do better and how can we work smarter. So I think even just being confronted with the truth of what the process was like, I also was not my boss. I was learning. I was doing things for the first time. So there were mistakes that I made that I definitely learned from, and that shed some light on some of the inefficiencies that were there, but were just covered up by like really smart, awesome people who were able to make it look solid, like flawless and seamless from the outset. So that was the inciting incident. I think looking at vendors, looking at different solutions, we definitely had a moment where we thought, do we build something? Because of course we're a unique unicorn that is so special. And then ultimately, went out and saw what was out in the market that was going to work for us. I think there's a question, like I'm sure we'll get into some, how do we actually go about it? But I think a lot of our testing or how we approach things and how we get buy-in is through like an A/B test. And that's really part of what we did. I felt it was really important to get in the system, see how it felt, see what the experience was going to be from an administrative perspective, from a user perspective, from a manager perspective, ask questions, probably more questions than Peter wanted to deal with. But it allowed me to get a really good sense of how I knew my organization operated and how I was going to be able to answer those questions or field those questions when they came from our CFO, our president, different various business unit leaders. I knew, hey, this is how it's going to do, or this is how it's going to work, or this is what's going to change and have to change because we're adapting to a new process. So I think having the data and information and being able to gather it was really, really key. I'm still surprised when SaaS companies don't have a sandbox or don't allow like people to play in a system before using it, because really you're not going to have any idea of what you're signing up for or what you're getting until you're able to walk through and make those mistakes yourself. And so I think all of those things were very, very important. I think it was pretty easy from like a data infosec security standpoint. They were happy. For context, we were using secured Google Sheets, but Google Sheets is not perfect and not flawless, and especially when you're working with changing your organization and scaling your organization as such, that side of the house was a very easy convince. It was more of the how is this actually going to work, and what am I going to feel like I'm missing from an executive and leadership standpoint.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. coming right off of what you're saying as well, we need people to relate to them on this problems they're going to have post-modernization or post-transformation too. I think as you kind of talked about, we want to get into talking about next really just the specifics of the process that you optimized at Hopper, that you were able to modernize in compensation planning. And so maybe just to set the stage for us, can you walk us through a little bit of how the current compensation planning process as a whole works at Hopper, and just any of the things today that you feel like were improvements or modernizations you made from that kind of secured Google Sheets system?
I mean, plenty. I could talk about it for a long time. I think the crux of the actual like budgeting, you know, who gets allocated how much, like that fundamentally hasn't really changed for us. I think the biggest change that we've experienced is from a manager or like user standpoint, as well as from an administrative standpoint. You know, we used to have to take and essentially build something from scratch. We got pretty fancy near the end. We were building macros and connected sheets and, you know, all of this fun stuff. But now it's really simple. Like we copy our last cycle, we make some adjustments. We have yet to have a cycle where we haven't adjusted something, but it's been, you know, a couple hours, maybe 8 hours worth of work versus the potentially 2-3 weeks worth of work that it was prior. So that has been a huge like change. Our communications and like, I guess like rollout plans have stayed pretty consistent. We've been able to pop in some like systems and obviously some links to do things more securely, but really the way in which we interact with managers from a communication standpoint has all stayed very similar. So the experience as a leader is all very similar. It's just where they ended up going that has changed, which has been great. And then of course, like we love it from an administrative standpoint, like the ability to check in on people, not Slack, which has been, you'd be surprised at how great that is. Not losing, you know, knowing who has access to what, not losing quote unquote spreadsheets. You know, just the visibility as like a partner in this process has been huge. Like the amount of time saved of not just reaching out to individuals has been really, really big. So I think that at the base of it, it's more access to information for leaders. It's in one place, which was not always the case before. And then from an admin standpoint, just having more control over the process has really allowed us to be more thoughtful as partners and more supportive as like an HR function to our business leaders who are like obviously undergoing this process.
Love it. And I mean, it sounds like well aligned to some of the topics earlier too of, hey, we can go through sort of throwing people at the problem here of get an Excel wizard or a linked Google Sheets person, or we can find a way to kind of improve the process a bit. And it sounds like you got quite a bit of advantages out of that. I know you were changing a lot as part of improving your compensation planning process. And we talked a little bit about kind of approaching this from an agile, like piecemeal perspective before. I'm wondering, did you do that, or in general, how did you approach what could have been an intimidating challenge of, hey, there's this large process that's involving, you know, many managers at a company that's great. How did you go after that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I alluded to it earlier. We're a big fan of testing, right? I was definitely under no circumstance going to allow like a big bang just approach for everyone. Anything in my change brain said absolutely not the way to go. It was also a key factor in getting that executive buy-in. Like we needed to show proof of concept in order for us to feel comfortable moving forward and drastically changing the process for some managers. So we actually did a pilot. HR at Hopper sits under our finance organization, under our CFO, who was more than happy to take on part of this like A/B test or this pilot program. So we did the finance business unit, which was approximately 70 or so individuals out of the almost 1,000. And we also did it with a partner group in the business. So they were a smaller business unit. It was our homes business unit, which now sits under lodgings, but org change is a whole different topic. But they were a pretty small, but also relatively adaptive group that we had built relationships with. So they were willing to be part of our pilot program. It really allowed us to get feedback directly from a smaller group, from our trusted group. We were able to iterate like mid-cycle things that were like working for us, things that weren't working for us. I know we definitely worked with you and your team, Peter, kind of like in the wire, right before launch and even up to during launch and closing. So I think that was really important. I cannot stress that it was very stressful doing 2 concurrent cycles on 2 different like systems and processes. But I think it was absolutely necessary for us to iron out all of the kinks before moving and launching it to the entire organization. I think it made for like a lot of learnings, a lot of like preemptive changes, as well as just a good understanding of what like our reality was going to look like in HR going forward. So it freed up a lot of time from my boss and myself. It was actually able to be driven a lot more by like my BP, like my associate, which is not the case before. So it really was, I don't want to say agile because I don't think it was all that agile. I want to say it was like an A/B test that allowed us to get our ducks in a row, but it also provided the necessary data to get that executive buy-in. You know, when our business partner, you know, the homes BU, when they were satisfied and happy and had like good feedback, that was really like the last tick on the checklist box to be like, okay, this makes sense. Let's move forward with it. So yeah, definitely an iterative process. And I think it was worked out for the best for us.
I certainly think you could take credit for that being a form of agile. You know, I think Andy was talking about agile in terms of changing one process and then another, expanding the impact. But using a business unit as a proof of concept, I think makes a ton of sense there as well. It sounds like you're able to learn a lot from that. Wondering if just kind of looking back on going through this sort of large change in modernizing a process, if there are any other learnings that you had, things that you would do differently, or just things that you would repeat again in modernizing another process.
Yeah, I think this one is interesting to reflect back on. I think like we're almost 2 years or so in, which is, it seems like a long time. I've been with Hopper for about 3 years now. I mean, I think it's the cliche, right? Like garbage in, garbage out. AQM is only going to be as great, or like whatever tool you're using is only going to be as great as the data you're importing. And we had some of those issues when we were doing things like previously in our previous process. And so I think underscoring the importance of, you know, no one loves an audit of like HR information systems data, but I think it's so important to come in with like the right information, the correct information, because it's only going to make your life easier. Then you're solving actual, you know, system or user problems, and you're not solving data problems at the very beginning. So that was definitely one piece. I wish we would have been able to spend more time. We work on like warp speed. So there was different reasons why we weren't able to do that, I think, to the extent that I would have liked to in hindsight. But that's definitely a key piece. I think the other one is pretty common knowledge, but I think we were focused really on, I think, copy and paste, for lack of a better word, of, you know, how we built this spreadsheet for the last 5 years is what we want to see exactly in the system. And I think we didn't pause and reflect long enough to say, does this make sense with what other tools were given in the system or in the process? Like, does this now make sense to just copy and paste it over? Or would a better alternative be, try to teach leaders and users that things are going to be a little different, but ultimately you're going to get to the same result. And actually, it might actually be better. So I do wish, I'm still trying to chip away at some of those columns, like let's remove some, let's hide some. I think we're making some progress. But I think really evaluating what you're putting in again, and what elements of the process that you're trying to change. It's easier, I think, sometimes, and sometimes it's not. But if you're making one change, you may as well make a few, slide them in there, see if people notice, rather than, do something and then change it again in 6 months and then change it again in 6 months after that. So I do wish we made a few more changes, just to what we were actually looking at and how we were using it. But yeah, I think like those are the two key elements. I think a lot of it factors down to time, and resourcing, which, is a constant battle, I think, with a lot of HR teams. We're not only looking at comp, we're looking at HR across the organization for, 7, 8, 900 people. And so dedicating a lot of time and a dedicated resource to this just ultimately wasn't in the cards. And so I think we made the best with what we could, and we've continued to improve in any ways that we can, year after year.
I love the second learning there, which I would just put several kind of exclamation points on for yeah, based on kind of what we see from people looking to adopt technology to improve one of their processes, of just, hey, really, you might want to question what process you have today before you try to automate that process. And particularly in the context of, if we're using technology to improve something, we may not need some of the bits of the process that we had before we did the modernization efforts. I think that's like good springboard in the next question that we had for you. Obviously, we're fortunate to be your technology partners in this situation. Wondering if you could share a bit about how Equium, or more broadly technology, was able to enable you in compensation planning. Like, what were the improvements that you were able to gain by modernizing, in this case with our technology, to solve some of the pain points that you had before?
Yeah, I think it's a great question too. I think some of the items that some of the things we struggled with a lot were, we worked with primarily business unit, and we call them verticals. I guess department would be a good example, or a good reference for other folks maybe on the call. We worked with those leaders. Often those leaders had senior managers, bigger teams that, for various reasons, sometimes they just offloaded comp on their side. And so while we were working with a smaller subset of leadership, we really didn't know how many layers down those leaders went. And so not necessarily having control over where access went, sometimes relying on leaders to do the right thing and, create the right filters and export the right thing, that can also be, a little bit tricky. And so I think having the visibility and having the control to know who is involved, what their approval chain looks like who's going to be involved in the process for any one individual person, has been really great. We've been able to, question some things, be like, is this person really right? Being able to have that flexibility has been really, really great. And then not worrying about, does this person still have access to this spreadsheet somewhere, where that's a security concern or a data concern. So those things have been really, really great. I think the other interrelated piece is just the real-time progress. Again, like I was saying, slacking people if they had, questions or issues, or slacking people to say hey, when is this going to be done? Where are you at? Has your manager approved it? Has it gone up the chain? A lot of that was a bit of a black box in terms of us being able to be really efficient partners. And so the real time, I think it's a link tree progress. You see little check marks. Being able to just look at that has been really easy, because then, I'm messaging maybe one or two people, or I'm sending reminders directly from Equium. And and not even me, actually, I wouldn't even say I do it, like my team member does it, and I'm able to offload that down the line into trusted hands. So just the access from that administrative standpoint has been really, really great. I think the other piece that we had talked about, and I think we experienced firsthand in our first few cycles, was what happens if we did something wrong, right? Like we tried to make a change because we wanted to, I don't know, add some more information or test out this way that Aquium could calculate something for us based off of, you know, a table. What if we miscalculated something? Like when we did that before on spreadsheets, it was a nightmare, right? Like how are you supposed to fix a formula in a sheet that has now been copied and shared with, I don't know who necessarily down the chain. And so being able to have like one place where I know everyone is going to have the same access to the same information. Sure, maybe I have to let people know who've already submitted, hey, FYI, this calculation has changed. These are the impacts. That's much easier than trying to track down, you know, where some of this information has gone or hasn't gone, has been updated or hasn't been updated. That's been really, really helpful. I mean, those are few and far between now, but definitely as we were iterating and trying to figure out the perfect kind of balance of what to or what not to do, it was definitely much easier with like an integrated tool than it was on our previous process.
Yeah, I love, I mean, both kind of the risk reduction there, but then the visibility, I imagine, is a big benefit for anyone who's kind of moving from a manual process. You know, if it is going to be a partnership between the business and the HR leaders, just understanding where people are is probably half the battle there, I think, for a lot of folks. Maybe no, go ahead.
Sorry, Peter. I was just going to say it's helpful too from leaders, like knowing that it's not necessarily us, or, you know, my CFO can go in and, you know, he can Slack message some people if he wants to, if they're holding up the process. It's not solely on HR anymore. And I think we're very much a give power to our leaders, and we really believe in that. And that like visibility has been really great, and people have kind of taken it and run with it, and be able to utilize like the information that's at their hands.
I think that's like, you know, maybe the goal that a lot of folks should have in modernizing a process too, right? Is that your leaders have that power, right? They are responsible for managing their teams. And then how can you as an HR leader enable them? How can you give them the tools they need to better own their team, own their responsibilities as well? So that's awesome. One more question for you on kind of that area is just, okay, obviously it's a partnership between the management team and the HR team, which you've already established. As you kind of went through both rolling out this process and then actually kind of using a more modern process for comp planning, how did you go about getting feedback from your stakeholders, from the management team, and making sure that it was landing in that way that you wanted to?
Yeah, I think in our kind of change rollout plan, I think we were probably like over anticipating feedback and questions. I think rightly so. So we did when we first, I think for the first 3 cycles, we had Aquium question sessions. And so that was specifically for managers, for users, for feedback. We did get some feedback. We were able to like either action it right on the spot and make the changes, which was really appreciated, or it was something we had to take away and try to solve, maybe more on the back end, and then roll out, like I was saying before, to the rest of the population during a cycle. And so I think those sessions were really, really helpful. Getting busy leaders to join things like that can be a difficulty in and of itself, but I think those who are really invested in the process or really had specific feedback did join and did share, which I think was really, really helpful. The other thing for us is, I think, and I want to say this in the nicest way possible, if you are implementing a change and you don't hear much, I call that kind of a success because usually, people aren't going to shout super loudly about a new compensation or performance management process or a new HR system, but you're going to hear it if it's gone very poorly. And so I think we took a lot of the that as a positive indication of how things are moving. And then I do still get forwarded, ad hoc Slack messages every once in a while. I think our president, just this last compensation cycle we wrapped up at the end of May, actually, it was again, this is great. This seems like it's really well oiled at this point, which is happy feedback for me to receive. So even if it comes anecdotally here and there, I think those were two of the key pieces of feedback or ways we were able to gather feedback.
Love when you get the kind of ad hoc compliments, but probably can't expect those as much. And honestly, the quiet that you were alluding to is actually something we've heard from a number of folks and trying to ask them, like, how do we know this was successful? The idea of the quiet index was something that one of our other clients mentioned. We did very well.
It'll be loud. It'll be loud if it's not good. You will definitely hear if something is broken or not working well. For
sure. Yeah. Great. Well, that was the set of questions that I had for the two of you. We've got around 10 minutes left in conversation. And so we wanted to kind of pause it there and see if from the audience there are any questions on either for Andy on some of the kind of broader industry or theory, or for Michelle on her experiences going through the modernization process there. So just pause for a minute or two here. And if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section on the right. And we'll jump into some of them as we get going. And I'll just say, as we're kind of waiting for anyone to leave questions there, really deeply appreciate the time that both of you spent on the call today and kind of offering your insights. As we were hoping, I think that these were some pretty practical ones that folks can take back to the processes they may be wanting to modernize and the changes they need to make within their organizations.
Michelle, I actually had a question for you while folks are kind of processing and doing some typing. I'm curious, from the story you shared, I think one thing that stands out is, a lot of times when you do implement a new system or a new process or you evolve, people quickly forget the ground that they've captured and how it used to be. Mm-hmm. I'd be curious, was there a go back to business leaders, stakeholders to kind of remind them about the from to and demonstrate the actual value delivery piece on it? Or is that a little bit in the works? I'd just be curious, because that's, to your point about the quiet index, great indicator that you haven't disrupted anything, but also just reminding people how big of a step forward it is, and whether you reference it overtly as building agility for the organization or people just implicitly understand that to be what it is. And yeah, I would just be curious about your loop back.
Yeah, I think understanding Hopper's context is pretty important. We are a very asynchronous global company. I think we're close to 30 different regions at this point. And so opportunities for us to get together a whole org, few and far between. So when we do, it's much more focused on business. So from a town hall perspective, it's not something that we often share. What we do is we do a lot of communication with managers and new managers and managers who've been there for a long time. So I think we do it more on a targeted basis. We definitely remember in people operations, we do annual postmortems and just look back at the year and accomplishments. So I think it's more quiet than it is overt. I'd love to shout it from the rooftops. I do whenever I can, whenever asked or whenever the opportunity arises, but not necessarily from an organizational standpoint. I wish. I'm hoping for it.
One day.
Yeah.
People always kind of re-baseline a little bit there, and then you stop getting the credit. That's a great question. We got another question from Ruth here in the audience that I think is relevant to a comment you made earlier, Michelle, of haven't quite gotten through a new planning cycle without making at least some changes yet, which I think is probably true of a lot of organizations. So Ruth had the question there about, their process changes a bit every year as well. And just curious how you're keeping up the managers with those changes and making sure that they know what to do with kind of the new process each year or each 6 months.
Yeah, I will give credit to the leaders in my organization, and I think even like all the employees in my organization as well, very resilient to change. We work in a very fast-paced, ever-changing business, and I think that allows for a higher tolerance than I think some organizations. I used to work in consulting. I've worked with public sector. I've worked kind of in various different, different industries, and that acceptance of change is a huge variable across your population. I think I'm also very fortunate to have, like, working in tech, have very tech literate employees and individuals, which allows us to not really have to explain that much when it comes from a tech perspective. We have one very basic high level document that complements any of the, I think, Notion, is it, Peter, that you use? Like the documentation that Aquium itself has. But as an organization, we're very lean on that for a reason, because things are changing both with the product, but also with our process itself. I think the most change that we do is typically with timelines or expectations, and that we deal with from a communication standpoint. So our communication package will change. We'll highlight specifically what's changed from process to process. There is something to highlight in the system specifically, we'll do it there. But we use a kind of two-pronged approach: email, Slack. Like I said, we love Slack. So we'll do that, and we'll make sure that however it is that someone wants to access the information about how the process is going to go this round, they have access to that information. It's super clear, and it's readily available wherever they might look. So we'll put it in multiple places. We'll pin it to different channels. We'll make sure that anyone who needs that information has access to it. So I think we do it more from the communications side, less so than explanatory in the tool itself. I think the tool's pretty intuitive, given our population and what we're working with.
I want to piggyback off Ruth's question a little bit there too. We hear about, particularly in compensation planning, I think this is true of compensation and performance management quite a bit, exactly what you said and what Ruth said here as well, of that there's some change pretty much every time. These are very dynamic processes. They evolve with the organization's culture, things like that. Would love to get your thoughts on that when it comes to technology. Like, to what extent, either when you were kind of looking at compensation planning technology or when you look at kind of other technologies in the organization, does your desire to be able to continue to iterate on your own processes factor into that? And how does that affect what you're looking for when you're selecting technologies as part of a modernization effort?
Oh, it's one of the biggest things that we look at. I think beyond a very receptive partnership, we look for things that are flexible. Like I said, our business changes very quickly, and that means we have to change very quickly too. And so rigidity is not something we look for at all. We've actually gotten ourselves into binds where, we actually have to build stuff ourselves. My team has upskilled in SQL and AppScript and things that you wouldn't think that HR BPs and folks in HR would necessarily have skills in, but we've had to, because we have to adapt to more rigid systems that we can't be as flexible in. So it's, as we move on and we're starting to chip away at our HR tech stack, it's one of the key pieces that we look at, beyond flexibility and the partnership and how we as an organization are going to work with a specific partner and how how good that partnership is going to be, and how willing, on both ends we're able to communicate and change and adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I just know it's something that we try to think about a lot, both in how we talk to folks we're thinking about working with and how we think about building a product, is that, to your point from much earlier in the conversation, you're going to realize things about your process that don't work for you anymore, or that it maybe never worked for you. It took a little while to realize. And so I know we try to make it such that you can easily adapt your process. And interesting to hear that that's an important part of other technology selection too. It doesn't look like we had any other questions coming in from the audience, and we're just about a couple minutes here from when we're scheduled to wrap up anyway. So, I just wanted to say again how much we appreciate both of you, who I know are leaders of busy organizations, taking the time out of your day to come in and share your thoughts and lessons you've learned with everybody on the call. So thanks so much. It's been a pleasure talking with both of you, and wish you the best going forward.
Awesome. Thanks
so much, Peter, Michelle.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.